Hi there, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm not sure why my... Sorry about that, everybody. I hope you're still there with me. Yeah, always a technical glitch, just like hackathons. Global Hack Week is the same. We have when it comes to demo time, when it comes to the live main feature, there's always some kind of technical glitch. So I apologize for that. But yeah, it's great to be here with all of you. See, I'm drinking this pink raspberry drink. So I don't know if do any of you in the chat like raspberries. Let me know. Send me a message if you like to eat raspberries. I really like their flavor, so that's why I'm drinking that today. But yeah, hi everybody, and welcome to the event. So I saw some messages while we were setting up from some folks who were not able to check in. So if anybody has that link to check in, be sure to share it with your friends. And yeah, let me paste here in the chat. Sorry, I'm like being a boomer right now. I'm like going like this. Just trying to see over one of my screens into the other screen. that was kind of embarrassing, but anyway, there it is. And this is actually the slideshow that we have for today that I just pasted in the chat. So if you want, go ahead and take a look at that. You can certainly follow along. Actually, I want to just make sure that I have view only permission for this. All right, so hopefully now you can see a little bit of the slides. I'm gonna get rid of our reminders part of this slideshow. I don't really want to share that with you yet, but this is our goal for the day, is to work on our hack planner. And our hack planner, for those of you who've never made one, it's going to help us with our website. And so, I'm sorry, with creating our hack project when we do a hackathon. So have you and your friends ever, wanted to plan your hackathon project out? Maybe you use a whiteboard or some other method, but actually for our purposes, we're going to build a new tool called a hack planner that you can maybe use in your next hackathon to plan out your ideas and strategize for that. So there you go. I did this as humble flex. That's pretty funny. Humble flex, yeah. That was an unintentional humble flex. You better make a copy of the slides on your own now, so that I don't take them away. I can take them away anytime I want. No, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you all, but yeah. So hopefully you all are able to check in. Apparently the time on the check-in page is 2 hours later. That's not good. Let me send a message to one of my team members here at MLH, and I'm gonna see if I can fix that for all of you. Okay, so I just sent a message, and hopefully that will help us get it resolved. But anyway, it's going to hopefully be fixed right now. Gaio Joffrey says, can a hack planner be like a Trello? That's a great idea. We're kind of going to make a Trello-esque application. In fact, if you want to implement it similar to Trello, we would need 3 different segments where we start with one to have like almost about to do, and then the second section would be doing, and the third section would be done. But yeah, we're going to make something really similar. So that's a good question. All right. So now that you all are, yeah, great. Thank you for verifying, Taco Worm. I love your icon, by the way. That's such a cute taco worm. Everybody check that out. I wish I had something like that. All I have is my face. But yeah, so everybody try again. See if you can check in now. Hopefully it'll work for you. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started now, because we've had some time to check in and you all have access to the slides. If you don't have the slide link, send a message in the chat, and maybe one of your friends in the community can help you out and give that to you while we're hacking today. So let me go ahead and share screen. Do my crazy thing again. I need to think of a better system for having 2 monitors. This is my first time trying with 2 monitors in a long time for Global Hack Week. And yeah, so please bear with me while I get used to it. But yeah, so here's our slides. So hopefully you all can follow along with these as we go through our project. And first I want to talk about why we would build a hack planner. And some of you have spoken about this a little bit in the chat. Something like Trello might be a good analogy for the hack planner. It's a tool or an application that we're going to design to help hackers and participants at the event effectively plan, organize, and manage activities during a hackathon. So this is going to be a way to basically implement your hack project with an organizational tool. So it'll streamline your working together with each other at the event. And let's see, why would we want to build a hack planner? Well, here's some of the possible benefits. We have some time management that could be useful. Task and goal tracking. And so maybe you could send reminders. Hey, you better be at this stage by 24 hours into the hackathon. You better be by another stage after 36. So that could be a really good thing. So finally, we have team collaboration and resource management. So this is about separating your efforts and divide and conquer. So, we're going to be implementing different features to our application in order to get at all of these benefits for the hack planner today. And so this session is actually 4 different sessions. So today we're going to focus on CRUD operations. I know you all might not know about what CRUD operations are. Does anybody in the chat know what CRUD is and can tell me what it stands for? By the way, no peeking at the slides. The slides have all of the answers, but I want to see if you're able to recall or if any members in our community can tell us. Okay. I see create, read, update, delete. Yes. So let me pick someone to highlight. Winsta says create, read, update, delete. And that is correct. So good job with that. And so we're going to implement all of these. It's actually really common when we're managing data in a full stack application to implement these 4 different features. And so we're going to do that today. All right. And thank you to those in the chat who are sending out the check-in link, who are helping us out. So thank you for all of that. And Thunder V says it's a programmer's version of eat, sleep, rave, and repeat. that sounds great. But yeah, hopefully this one is more realistic. But anyway, that's great. So let's continue on with our slides here. So on day one, we're going to learn our CRUD operations, and we're going to learn routing and databases as well, which are super related topics. Okay, so basically on day two, we're going to try and connect our app to an API. We're going to implement some of these time tracking and reminders features that we spoke about in the benefits of the Hack Planner. On day three, we're going to do team collaboration. So we're going to learn how to create and authenticate user accounts, which is going to be a really important one. And yeah, on day four, we're going to learn how to create a search feature to get your project started using ChatGPT AI. Okay. And actually, day four, I have not prepped the material yet for. So just because I wanted to leave some, wiggle room for us and in that day four session. So this is just a loose plan, and maybe we'll get to more or less depending on how fast we go through the workshop and how much time we have. But this is the basic idea: is to go through these 4 days on those 4 features. But first, let's set up our Python coding environments. So, hopefully a lot of you are familiar with how to set up a Python coding environment, but we're going to actually be doing that ourselves. Just a brief walkthrough today. And Nudian says jam-packed sessions. Yeah, it's a pretty ambitious track this time, but I think it'll be really helpful for all of you as you go through your code samples. And hopefully by the end, you'll have a better understanding of some of these concepts. So if you're in a technical interview or you are needing to know these things for a project you want to create on your own, you'll have it. So yeah, let's go through this setting up Python coding environment thing. And the first thing I want you all to do is download Python, of course. So if you want to program in Python, you need to download in Python. Let's go to that website. So to go to the Python download page, you want to go to python.org/downloads. Here it is. Okay. And let me share my screen and show you that. Here it is. So Joffrey says, this will be my first time using Python. So that's great. Congratulations on taking the step into Python. Don't worry, it's going to be super accessible to those of you who have never used Python before. The only thing is, we are going to be relying on some computer science concepts. So it will be helpful to have some computer science knowledge, basic ideas like functions, objects, things like that. If you have some familiarity with, it's going to make it so much easier for you to do this workshop. So I highly recommend that. But yeah, so go ahead and download Python, and you're going to want to click on this button, and it's going to ask you if you want to install it onto your path, and you want to agree to do that, because that's what's going to allow you to access Python through your command terminal in an easy, streamlined way. So that'll be super important. Another resource that we're going to be using today is called Visual Studio Code. So let me show you that. If you have a preferred editor that you like to use for your code, don't worry about it. But I wanted to send this link along in case you wanted a suggestion of how to code in a code editor. Visual Studio Code is my favorite, and it's a lot of people's favorite, and it's for a reason too. It's because Visual Studio Code is super customizable. It's 100% free. It's really well polished. So I sent that link over, and if you want to download Visual Studio Code and use it for your project today, that's totally okay. Let me share my screen again here. All right, so here's Visual Studio Code, and mine says Mac because I'm using a Mac today, but you can download it for basically any operating system. Then you can see these extensions. This is actually this screenshot over here shows the extensions marketplace, where you can basically download a lot of tools to customize your Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. And so, actually, we'll be using this Python extension today. Just going to make it easier for you to see the code, do things like that. And let me actually share my my Visual Studio Code environment. Do that right now. Someone says VS Code is open source. Absolutely. It absolutely is open source. One of my favorite open source projects, actually. And by the way, if you're interested in open source, I wanted to just make a quick plug for our fellowship, because not everybody at the season launch, we sometimes have some new members to our community, so not everybody is aware of our fellowship program. But let me show you that. So I just sent a link in the chat. If you're interested in applying, it's free to apply, and we do a lot of open source project learning there. So, and I saw some community members sharing their own preferences for code editors, and that's totally okay and encouraged. So feel free to check out any resources that our community members are sending there, if that's their preferred code editor. Okay, so let me share my screen and show you what it should look like when you get your Visual Studio Code going. All right, hopefully you all can see this. So, it's going to ask you to create a new file. We can kind of it didn't work, but over here in this icon, you can click on New File, and let's create a new file called test.py. And if you call it test.py, it'll immediately open up this editor here that you can use. Some people say light mode. Yeah, I like light mode. I'm sorry for those of you who don't like light mode. I guess I'll use dark mode if people prefer that. Let's see. How can I do that? Which one do you prefer? Anybody have a preference here? One Dark Pro. I don't see it. Monokai. Let's try Monokai. I've never tried that before. That's pretty good. Let's test it. Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's not too bad. All right, we're gonna try this one today, and maybe Patel says, "My eyes can relax now." That's great. All right, everyone. So we'll go with this theme for today. And others are asking me to zoom in a little bit. Let me see if I can do that. Some of us are still installing, so we have plenty of time to play around a little bit. So don't worry if you're still installing. That's totally fine. Trying to see how I can increase the font size here. Let's try and increase it to 25. Oh, that's not what I want. All right, let's go back to our... Is that any better? Can people see that a little bit better? And actually, I think if I shrink this window a little bit, you may also be able to see the other aspects of the files better. What do you all think of that? Is that a little bit better? Good. Let's see. What frameworks are we using for this? That's a great question. So we're going to use some native programming languages. So we're going to use native JavaScript, CSS, HTML, Python, but we're also going to implement the Flask framework for today. So that'll be really good for us to get some practice with a framework. And you also see how much easier it makes it for us to build our routes, for us to implement the CRUD operations. And we had a question in the chat that I want to just highlight from a little bit ago. What's the difference between the Python IDE and the Python launcher? What's the role and function of each one? How does the Python execute and/or compile a file? Can you explain the process? Thanks, regards, MLH. That's a really good question, and I saw some answers in the chat as well to this one, but wanted to kind of highlight this one. So IDE is a development like environment. So what we're looking at right now is an IDE. The Python launcher, I guess, is just used to install the Python programming language onto your computer. Yeah, I think so. But I'm actually not so familiar with the term Python launcher. But I can answer this number 3 question, which is, how does the Python execute and/or compile a file? So Python actually interprets instead of compiles. So compile means that you take a high-level language, which has these big abstract ideas like print. This says print, and it will actually, to compile, it will convert that high-level abstract language into a really low-level language like assembly. I don't know if any of you have heard of assembly, but that would be the function of a compiler, and you need a separate program to compile, which is basically converting between 2 languages. And Python does not do this. Python is an interpreted language. So Python breaks down, it considers sort of each abstract unit on its own, instead of compiling down into this assembly like program and then running that. So it's a little bit different than a compiled language. So that's kind of I'm sorry not to get too into the weeds on this, because this workshop isn't really designed to cover that, but I hope that gives you a little bit of a better idea. And then I see that Gaming Skull says here, yeah, this is a pretty this is a pretty good way of describing it. So I definitely recommend you look at this, and you can also look into the difference between compiled languages and interpreted languages. I highly recommend you look at that because actually there is a difference between the two. And here, yeah, here's a good sort of example here. But thank you all for that. And yeah, our community is just so great. I love it when people are able to give really in-depth answers in the comments to some of these questions. And thank you all for doing that. So today, hopefully you're all able to get to this Visual Studio Code and maybe try doing what I did, write test.py and then print it, print 3. And when you run that, you can click on this run button up here, or you can click on something else, but it should work. Funny enough, it's not working anymore. Not sure why, but oh, I think it's because now I'm already in the Python editor down here. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Kill this terminal. And if I run again, it should run. So see if you can get there. Yeah, quit. Quit is another way to do that. Sounds good. So send a chat if you're still working on this, and we'll wait up for you. But if you're not still working on it, that's totally okay. We'll begin our session for the day. I like all of these commands I didn't know about. Quit, exit, clear. Wow. Well, it says 3 printed. Hello world. Hi there. That's great. I'm glad that you all are able to get going with this. All right. So, right. Exactly. The problem is I was in the Python shell. So, yeah. It says do organizations actually use these NoSQL databases for their extra large scale databases? So I'm not sure what you mean by that. We're actually today what we're using is a SQL database. We're not using a NoSQL database, but for NoSQL, I do believe there are several products that are used at large scale, like MongoDB, for example, is used at large scale. So, yes. And then Tintin says, hello, what are the VS Code add-ons, plugins, and or API libraries to install with the Python program code? This is a great question. So let me send that to you. I think it should actually install by default. But basically, you want to install the Python extension. And let me show you that. Oh, you mistyped. Yeah. So actually, those like SQLite packages are not really used at large scale because they do not offer as much customization as actually SQL does. So it's a little bit different, but yeah, for our purposes, SQLite, which is the which is basically the version of SQL we'll be using today, it will be good enough for our hack planner. So lots of really good questions today. I'm so happy to see it. And I'd love to get through all of them, but I want to actually kind of try and move on a little bit in our project so that, those of you who are ready to start coding, we can actually get some code down on the screen. So let's try that. But please continue to ask your questions. We love getting your questions, and the folks in the chat are, we have some real experts in our community who can help you with any question you might have, and I'm happy to, of course, answer any questions too. So please do that. But yeah, so today is day one: task management and CRUD operations. So you might want to know, what is CRUD. Well, I already asked you all about this at the beginning, and you gave me the answer. So CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. These are what you might want to do to data if you are a user, and you want to kind of have some data in your project. So first, create just means create a record. So let's think about a grocery list, for example. You want to be able to write a new item on your grocery list. And the way you do that in real life is you take a pen, here's a pen. You take a pen and you just write a new item on your list. But that's create. Now read, you can do anytime. You just open the grocery list and look at it. Update is pretty hard to do with your pen. So actually, maybe you would use like a pencil. I don't know if I have a pencil here. Yeah, I do. Here's a pencil. So you could use the eraser to erase your old entry and write a new one in there. So that would be update. Let's say you want to get organic eggs instead of eggs. So you erase the eggs and you write organic eggs. And then finally, delete would be how you could just maybe cross off after you've found the item. Like let's say you're at the grocery store and you want some lettuce. You get some lettuce and you can just cross it off your list. And that would be the same thing as deleting an entry. All right. So that's a really good one. The first step we're going to do is we're going to type pip install Flask in our terminal. So this is a way of installing the Flask framework, which is the only external package that we're going to use that doesn't come pre-installed with Python. So I think SQLite will come pre-installed most of the time with your Python when we install it, but Flask might not. So for that reason, we're going to install Flask this way. And let me go back to my code editor. So let's see here. So in Visual Studio Code, if you are in your Python shell, you can type pip install Flask. And in my case, it says, oh, it's already installed. But for you, this should trigger the Python, the Flask library to execute. That's a great comment that Daniel C. left. Thank you for leaving that comment, Daniel. Pip3 could also be the name of your pip on your path. So sometimes it will install as pip, sometimes it will install as pip3. But yeah, we are going to learn backend Python today. And so that will be really good for us to get some practice on this. And Flask will be a really good framework for that, for routing between our front end and our back end. All right. So now that we have Flask installed, we can start coding. And so let's see. I'm gonna start uh, with our first our step 2, which is create a new directory for your project and navigate to it using your code editor. And so I already have this directory set up. It's actually my desktop. So I'm just going to build this project on my desktop. Um, so step 3 is to create a new Python file called app.py. And this is just a convention. You could call it hamburger.py if you wanted to, but I'll just call it app.py, and I'll delete this print stuff. And we're going to import Flask. So we already installed Flask in our base directory. So our base environment rather. So we can now install it. So I'm going to say from Flask import, and we're going to import 4 different methods. So we're going to import Flask, render template, request, and redirect. I'm not sure if that, I don't think that, I might not run if we do it this way. So I'm just going to put it all on the same line. You can see there. I actually think I might change the font size back. Sorry, everybody, but it's just a little bit, it's a little bit wonky that this font size is so much bigger than everything else. Okay. So hopefully you can see that. And when we're using Python, we can do this. We could also have just said import Flask with this lowercase. And if we wanted to use any of these methods, we would have had to say Flask dot render template. So now if we want to use render template, we can just type render template. We don't have to type Flask dot render template. And so this line imports functionality into our project. We don't have to write it, basically. And isn't that great? Because wouldn't this workshop have to be super long if we were going to build our own system for routing information from the front end to the back end? It'd be tough. And thank you, Joffrey, for sending that link. This is super great. I'm glad you were able to send that to the hackers so that everybody can stay on the same page. Make sure you follow along with the slides. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next part of the project. I'm gonna move on to initializing our Flask application. So in this case, we're going to use app equals Flask, and then we're going to use underscore underscore name. This is a line of code that you will always type for Flask. And so you're always going to be using this when you're using Flask, and it's basically creating the Flask object. And we'll see how it's used later when we cover routes. Okay, so I'm going to actually switch back to the slides, and we're gonna go through the slides for this route portion, and then we'll come back to our editor and we'll implement it. But I wanted to show you the slides here because I have some information present. So let's go to that. So routes. What are routes? Well, routes in Flask determine the URL paths that the application can respond to. So a route is going to specify a URL pattern and associate it with a specific function, which we call the view function. And what this means in like plain, more plain language is that it's associating a URL with a view. For example, let's say you have python.org. If you type python.org into your browser, you will view the main page of Python, of the Python website. But if you type python.org/download, that's a different URL. And so actually that's associated with a different view, and it'll show you a button to download and things like that. So we're gonna explore that more hands-on later, but I just wanted to get you used to this idea of what a route is. And so when a user accesses a specific URL in their browser, Flask matches the URL to a route and triggers the associated view function to handle the request. You might be wondering, what's a request? Well, we're gonna cover that, so don't worry. And routes are defined using the app.route decorator in Flask. So raise your, I guess not raise your hand, but send a chat if you have ever heard of the word decorator. If you've heard of decorator. If you've used decorator. This is a kind of advanced Python concept, but it's actually really easy to use. So even if you've never used Python before, I think you should be able to follow along with using this decorator. So basically, a decorator adds additional features to a function. And one of them, and it's like a wrapper function, exactly. So Mr. NPH, thank you for that comment. It's exactly like a wrapper function. So let's say you have a function that says print 3, right? Like that function we wrote earlier. Well, you could write a decorator that's called timer, and you could apply that decorator to the function print. And maybe that decorator tells you how long it takes for the print function to execute. So it's adding additional features to your function. And in this case, we're going to write these view functions, which will display information for the user, and then the route decorator will add an additional functionality to that view function, which allows it to be associated with a URL. Okay, so that's kind of the basis of routes. And so let's continue with these slides with an example. So here's the example that I have for you. And the decorator is this first line up here, at app.route, and then there's a slash. And so app is the name of our Flask object. You'll remember from step 5, when we did this in the Visual Studio Code editor. So app is actually our Flask application. And then .route is a decorator that we can implement with our app object. And the argument we give to route is a slash. And so this slash represents that we're looking at the home page, which is just the default location of the app. So we're saying whenever the user visits the home screen, we want to execute this view function. And so this view function that we've written here is called index, and it returns the text hello world. So if the user goes to this website, the only thing on this website is going to be the words hello world, and that's going to be the front page. And there's no other pages yet, but this is probably the most basic Flask application that you can create. All right. Does anybody have any questions about that? I hope that's clear. And I'm actually going to take a pause to look in the comments and see what kinds of questions folks have. So I noticed that Aditya is having some trouble with installing Flask, and thank you all for helping with that, by the way. Yeah, I'm not sure what you need to do in this case. I think you should probably restart your installation. Um, so that would be my recommendation. And then you said when you open a terminal as admin, it worked. So maybe that's what you needed to do. So I hope that fixed your problem. And if anybody else has having that problem, please try to go into admin and do the same. Okay. Someone says, can you put the index into a different file like React? I see what you're saying. Yes, you can do that. You absolutely can. And I'll show you how to do that. We're actually going to get into that today. That's why we have the render template method that we imported. So another person says, does it work the same as a React router? It basically does. All routers are accomplishing the same sort of thing, where we are associating a path to a view. And Grass Bob says, does view functions only mean functions that update the view, not CRUD functions? Actually, view functions refers to a function that will show a display onto the screen, and we can pass information to the view function. So let's say the user logged in, and now we know their profile picture. We could pass the profile picture into the view function, and then the view function would be able to display that profile picture. So that's actually an update, right? If you think about it, we updated the record or you could also describe that as a read. And so, you can kind of do these functions with our view function. So don't, yeah, that's totally great question. Someone else says, I have a little experience with Node, and in Node we write get and post requests. So how can we do that here? This is a great question. We're going to today we are going to do get and post requests. So just stay tuned, and we will do that. All right. And then Shaman T says, how do we specify get, post, delete in Flask? We're definitely going to do that today. So I'll show you how to do that really soon. I actually think on the next slide I'll give you an example of that in our views. So views are Python functions that handle HTTP requests. And so a lot of you have been talking about some of these. Get, post, those are all HTTP requests. And it will generate responses to be sent back to the client. A view function is responsible for processing the user's request, performing necessary actions, and returning an appropriate response. So that response could be in various forms. So we're going to actually look at a lot of these different forms, such as HTML. So for example, views could return an HTML object to be displayed, a JSON object for storing data, or a redirect. So they could redirect you to another website or another path. And views are typically associated with routes because the route, again, is going to determine which view is called for a specific URL. And so here's an example of a view function. We already saw an example with the index function, but I'm just showing another one. So in this case, the route is actually to the tasks directory. So you could think of it like mlh.io/tasks, for example. If I don't think that's actually a legitimate URL, but if you were to visit that URL, let's just say you would get this view function. And this is going to return a template, which is tasks.html. And then it passes some information into there with this second argument. So this is render template method. But the idea here is we're just going to view this tasks.html file. And when the user visits the tasks URL, Flask calls the tasks function, retrieves the tasks from the database, and returns the rendered tasks.html template with the tasks passed as a variable. Yeah. So now we're moving on to part one, which is implementing CRUD, and we are going to be using Flask and all of our concepts today to implement CRUD. Gaming Skull says, why are we using Flask and not Node.js or Spring? Is there a preference due to ease of use, or is it just so? It's pretty much just so. We could definitely use another framework, but I kind of just chose this one because it's pretty widely used. It's simple to use, so folks can get some practice with these concepts. And actually, the concepts we'll learn with Flask are totally applicable to Node and other frameworks. So if you wanted to learn about routes, you could actually use that knowledge about routes that you're going to gain from today on any framework. So that's a great question, though. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So now we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we're going to actually go on to this next part where we implement the CRUD operations. But yeah, just need a quick break and to give you all a chance to catch up if you're running a little behind and installing things. But yeah, I'll see you all in 5 minutes. right, everybody, welcome. Sorry, I still have this background up. Let me get rid of that. All right, there we go. Hopefully you can see me now. Yeah, I hope you all can, maybe you can tell I don't use StreamYard all the time. So sometimes I get a little confused of what I should be doing, but appreciate you all with your patience. And yeah, we had some questions, which I really appreciate folks answering. And in particular to Gaming Skull 16, I've seen you around a lot in previous Global Hack Weeks, and you're always really helpful. So thank you for, just a shout out to you for being so helpful to everybody. And that's not to say, we also have so many other community members who are being really helpful. So thank you to all of you. But yeah, well, we had a question after installing Flask. What is next? And so the next thing that I sort of put in here was to write an import statement. So we have from Flask import these 4 different methods: Flask, render template, request, and redirect. And we also wrote a line that is app equals Flask underscore underscore name underscore underscore. So this is basically the 2 lines of code that you'll always write whenever you're creating a Flask application. Another question was, can anyone explain decorators again in simple words? I didn't think I get it. So basically, decorators are adding additional features to an app, to a function. So let's say we had a decorator. I didn't create a decorator like this, so this code won't work. But let's just say we call it time. So this would be time at a time as our decorator. And we could define a function called print, and just or print this or something. That would just say we want to print text. And so print this is our function, and decorator of time might allow us to track the time to complete the function. So that would be the use of the decorator, and we could apply this decorator to multiple functions. Like let's say we had another function which was multiply by 2, and this would return x times 2. And if we wanted to know which function will complete faster, we could just use this time decorator on both of them. We wouldn't have to add that feature to this by having some system time variable and then printing it out at the end, n minus start or something. That's a pretty common feature that people will implement, but instead of implementing that within the function, we can sort of wrap the function in this functionality by using the time decorator. So it's just a way to add additional functionality to your Python functions using a decorator. And there's a lot of resources online about decorators as well. So I highly recommend you check out those if you still have questions. But so yeah, this is all that we did in our first little bit of the project. So I'm actually going to be sending you all a GitHub repository that you can use to follow along with what we're doing today. And so let me send that along. In my personal GitHub, and I called it GHW July 2023. So this contains the code for today. We may not get to all of this today because I realize we're starting to run a little bit short. We're at 45 minutes now. But we've still planned to get through everything. And if you want to check in on your code and make sure that it's correct, you can reference this GitHub repository anytime you want. It should be public. And yeah, perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to stop screen sharing and present the slides once more. So we have our first part of the workshop, which is implementing CRUD. All right. So the first acronym is the first word in the acronym is create, and we're gonna create with this endpoint. Now, endpoint is what we call this whole entire piece of functionality where we are associating a path to a view function. So if I say the word endpoint, this is kind of what I'm referring to. But in short, we're referring to this add directory, and we're saying that, hey, if the user visits this add directory, if the add path is used, then we will have a post method, and then we will have this view function appear here. Okay, and so for those of you who are unaware, /add is the path for this route. Okay, and you heard me mention this post method thing, and we didn't see this on any of the decorators from our examples, but this post method is one of many HTTP methods, which are which is the protocol which the websites run off of. It's one of many of these HTTP methods, and it allows the user to send and receive data. So when we have a post method, we can issue a request and we can get a response, right? So most commonly, post records are used to edit, change, add data to the backend from the front end. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So you can see that we have the function define add item, and the first line is item equals request.form and then item. So we haven't created this form yet, but we're going to when we get to our HTML file. Basically, we're going to retrieve whatever the user wrote down in this form. So let's say that we wanted to write down a new goal, which is to come up with a project idea, right? So then the string come up with a project idea would be what we would store in this item variable. And then we're going to write items.append item. So items is going to be this global variable that we have in our file, and we will sort of use that as our local storage for now. We're going to implement the database later, but for now we'll just use items as our local storage. And then we're going to return redirect and this backslash here. So that backslash is just going to be our home page. And so when we add a new item, we will actually want to redirect back to the home. We don't want to stay on some other page, right? So that's why we implement that redirect there. And let's do this in the code editor so that you all can see. Yes, Tejas says post is used to send data. That is basically exactly right. So, all right. I'm going to open up our app.py file, which is where we have all of our routes, or where we will have them when we've started with our project. But I'm going to make a new variable called items. It's just going to be an empty list. So this is just going to be for a storage list for now. We're not going to have a database just yet. But let's implement our first route now. So use this decorator app, which is the name of our Flask app, route. And then we have the add path. And for the method, we're going to use, it's going to be a post method. And we use this list here to basically indicate that we could have more than one method, but for now, we're just going to choose post. Some of our methods will have both get and post. And so now we'll write define add item, which this is our view function. If you remember from the slides before our break, we just wrote our route, and now we're writing our view function. An item we said was going to be request dot form item. So we're going to get some item from a user filled form. That's why we have this request method here. And we're going to store it in this local variable. So then we're going to have items.append item. And as the comment said, there was a comment written in the slides. It sends the new item to the list, but it's not stored in a database. So we are not using databases yet, although we will eventually get there. And then the last line we'll write is return redirect. And we're going to use that home directory, just backslash right there. That indicates that we want the view function to return us to the home page or the home route. We haven't actually written any routes for the home page yet, but we will soon enough. So hopefully, this might be a little confusing at first because we're just getting started, but hopefully this will become clear, more clear over time. All right. So if anyone has any questions, by the way, please feel free to send a message in the chat. But for now, we're going to move on to our next letter in the acronym, which is read. And so the read decorator, you're going to want to just put this code into the app.py file, just like we did in the demo. But the read is going to take place at the home path. And so that's why our route is associated with the home path and just one backslash. And I'm calling this view function checklist because it's going to show us this checklist of what we have to do. You could also call it a task list or really whatever you want to. But it's going to return a render template object, which is called checklist.html. We, of course, have not built the HTML file yet, but we will get there, I promise you all. For now, we're just going to implement the endpoints. So let's walk through what's happening here in this example. The app.route is going to say, hey, if the user is routed to this path, this home directory, then trigger this view function to return a checklist.html file. Okay. So it's associating a user front-facing resource, which is the URL, with a backend resource, which is checklist.html. And this second argument here, items equals items, actually, this is going to pass additional information to checklist.html. So it's going to let us customize that HTML file in a way that is dynamic. And so that would change over time. And it makes a lot of sense then why we would redirect the user to the home directory after creating a new task, because then we want to display that task in the checklist, right? So now we've created our read functionality. I have a note here. By default, route uses the get method. So you may have wondered, why did we specify a method for the create feature, but then when it was time to create the read feature, we did not specify a method. And again, that's because the get method is what we use here. So for get, we're only letting the user receive data, not send it. So whenever the user is going to the home page, we're not trying to send information to the backend. We're just trying to read information from the backend. So that's why we use get. And again, it doesn't need to be specified because that's the default method for a route. All right, so hopefully that is helpful. Someone said your screen is not visible. I'm happy to go back and show you anything that you missed. I'm sorry if sometimes I forget to make my screen visible, so I apologize for that. But if you missed anything, please see if you can find it in the slides or the code repository, and that will be really useful. So another question that comes up in the chat is from Mangdani. What does items equals items do? So I'll show you this. Actually, with the color coding in the code editor, it's probably going to be even easier to look at. So let me do that. Yeah. So it's like Raichu Think said. I wonder if your username is based on the Pokemon character. I think there is a Pokemon character called Raichu. But anyway, I dig it. I dig it. So yeah, basically this is exactly right. If you look at the color coding here, you can see items equals items is referring to two different items. So I definitely could have made that more clear, so I apologize. But basically it's saying, let's pass this items list to the template so that it can use that information. So when we build our checklist.html file, we're going to actually customize it using these items, which right now is just an empty list, but eventually is going to be data that we pass to the back end. Or I'm sorry, to the front end. Okay, so hopefully that is a little bit of a clarification there. And now I'm going to go to implementing our next feature, which is the update feature. And actually, I'm going to do that in the code editor. You can feel free to check the slides or the code to get a grasp on this. But yeah, this is probably more helpful for me to actually live code it out for you. So create the up. So now we're creating the update, or you could call this an endpoint. So we're going to have this hosted at the edit path, and we're actually going to create a unique path for each item that we have in our list. And to do that, I'm going to use this data specifier, this little tag, say after edit, we're going to have a further directory which will be unique to each item ID. And the item IDs will just be basically 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever we create first in our checklist. For this update feature, we're actually going to use two methods. We're going to use get and post, because we want to be able to retrieve an item and also potentially update it. Not always update it, but just potentially. So let's create a new view function called edit item. And we're going to say that edit item view function is going to accept a argument called item ID. And so this next line, we're going to say item equals items, item ID -1. So we're saying, let's look for the item in the index associated with the item ID. So that's what this comment is for the one that's inside of the spreadsheet. Retrieve the item based on its index. Okay. So again, it says not updated in a database. There's no editing being done yet. It's just getting information. But if the request method equals post, so if we do send information, then we'll have a new item. And that new item is not going to exist in the old item database. it's actually going to be a new one that we get from the user by using the request method. So here we have method.request.form, and then we're taking whatever item is there. And we're going to have item ID -1, which is the index. We're going to set the value of that entry in our list or our like local database to be equal to this new item. So this is actually overwriting whatever information used to be there. We're saying, hey, now we're going to have this new item here. Okay, and of course, we'll just like we did with the add, the create operation, we're going to redirect to the home path, just like we did with this add item view function. Right? So hopefully that was visible to all of you. Okay. And here's a comment. Don't we need to use the method put for updating? You absolutely can use the put method for updating. So I will definitely agree with you there. However, post method is also acceptable. So basically, for those of you who are not familiar, the put method in HTTP allows you to send information, but you cannot receive a response. So we want to receive a response in this case, and so that's why we're using post. But you could absolutely use put. It just has less features. So for that reason, it's not necessary. And Mr. MPH says, isn't that for new entries usually? Yeah, so you could definitely use put methods, but yeah, post request is just slightly different, but we can use them both for modifying a resource. All right, so now we've created our edit feature here, but we're actually not done just yet, because we want to return an additional thing if we do not actually use this post method. So we want to return render template .html. Item ID equals item ID. So this is in the case that we're just going to get whatever item. So you remember we had this item we're retrieving based on its index. We didn't edit it yet. We haven't done anything to it. So this is basically just getting that information. And if that's all we do, well, we want to just return some web page called edit.html where that task will be visible. And we'll pass along our item and our item ID into there so that it can be used by render template. All right. So hopefully that is helpful to you all. I'm going to make this a little bit wider so that it's easier to see. Yeah, this is our edit item view function, which is creating the update functionality of our CRUD acronym. All right. So now we have one more to implement, which is delete. And so we're going to create the delete down here. And we're going to use a route. And the path will be delete and specify the item ID, because we don't want to delete everything whenever we want to delete, right? We usually just want to delete a specific item. So we're going to create a view function called delete item, and it will accept an item ID integer. And we can just use delete keyword to delete from the list a specific entry associated with our item ID. And then once we delete, we're going to return to the home directory. Yeah. So Ormus said, many APIs will return a key or a resulting object for both creation of new entries and updates. So you pretty much always want post. Yeah. I mean, we want to be able to confirm that some API or some service actually did what we asked it to do, right? So let's say we ask Google Maps to find us a location on planet Earth. Well, we want it to be able to confirm that it received that request, right? So usually, and then let's say we want to change it, right? You want to know for both of those functionalities, you want to know that the API got your request and it was successful. Otherwise, you might want to trigger some error handling, uh, right? So it's really important to hear back from your API to make sure it did what you wanted it to do. Catmoid says, why do we need to pass in item as item equals item? Couldn't we pass it in as item? That's a good question. So in Flask, you're actually allowed to specify a different variable name for the front end and the back end. So the first item here, which is the key, that is going to be associated with what we see on the front end when we build edit.html. The second item here, which is the value, is going to be associated with what we call it on the back end. And so it is basically a keyword argument. That's right. We can specify that however we want. But that's a good question. All right. So with these 4 different endpoints, we have completed the entire CRUD functionality for our website. So that's super exciting. And what we can do now is work on our front end, because we're not really ready to run our full stack application yet. So let's go back to the slides, and we're going to use the slides to talk about our front end. All right. So we've done all of our CRUD operations, and now it's time to create our HTML templates. So all of our templates have to exist in a directory called template. So if you're not familiar with how to create a directory in Visual Studio Code, we're going to learn how to do that. So don't worry. But basically, Flask is going to search this templates directory to find any template that you direct it to using the render template method. And here's our checklist.html code. It's super simple. I'm actually going to make it prettier with some CSS later. But for now, this is what it looks like. You can see that there's a bunch of tags which are associated with HTML. It tells your web browser where to put all this information. So Hack Planner app, that should go in the title, which is what is displayed in your tab of your browser. H1 is the first header, which is the biggest main text in the project. UL is associated with unordered list. And then actually these curly braces are unique to the Flask framework. And these percentage sort of characters What that's telling Flask is that we want to start a for loop with our items. And so this is why we call it items equals items, because that key that we have is going to be used in the HTML file. So, each item here in our list is going to then get printed out using these double curly braces. And yeah, we're going to print those in a list, which has links in it as well. So we'll have edit and delete links that will go to the particular paths associated with those item IDs, but only if the user clicks on edit or delete. And then we end the for loop. It's actually important to end a for loop in Flask, which is not how Python works, but it is how Flask works. And then we will end our unordered list with this tag here. And finally, we have this form at the bottom of our HTML file, which is associated with the add pathway and a post method. So you remember our create endpoint, which exists in the Flask app. Well, that takes its information from this form. And so we have an input, which is this, this field where you can enter some item. And we have a button that allows us to add that information. So basically, when you click that button, it will trigger the add. It will trigger your browser to go to this add path, and whatever happens at the add path will execute according to what we wrote in our route. Does that make sense? And so actually we have some questions about how would you do it in a React app. So maybe instead of implementing more features, we will recreate this project in React. That could be kind of a good project idea, don't you think? Yeah. So maybe we'll do that this week as well, is recreate this project, but in React. So now Joffrey says, can you go back to Python and scroll down? No problem. Oh, and there's a Next.js course on GHW, so we can do that as well. Oh, 6 a.m., that's brutal. Would you be surprised, Mr. NPH, if I told you most days I wake up at 6 a.m., so that'd be not too bad for me. But anyway, let's continue along with this. So I'm gonna stop sharing this slideshow, and we're gonna build this in Visual Studio Code because it had some requests to go back to Visual Studio Code. So let's do it. All right. Add it to the stream. And here we go. So first I'm just going to scroll down so that people can see what's here. If you need to take a screenshot or anything like that, please do so. I'm going to close out of this little spot here actually, because we don't need the terminal right now. So yeah, if you need to take a screenshot or anything like that, please do so. But I'm going to go ahead and click this add folder button to create a new folder. We're going to call this new folder templates. This is where we can store our templates. Right? And in this templates folder, I'm going to create a new file, checklist.html. And someone asked if the code is in the repo. It is. So there's code in the repo. It might be a little bit different because it includes the database functionality. But you should be able to follow along more or less with what exists in the repository. So now I'm gonna write this out. So we have our doc type HTML, our HTML tags in there. Head tags are used for any like information related to the metadata of the project, and so the title of the file is certainly metadata, and we'll use it actually in the tab. Most Chrome, like Chrome, for example, Safari, they will use this information to display in the tab. But then we'll put the body of the file, which is what you actually see when you navigate to the page. And like I said, H1 is the largest text in the project, so put hack planner there. Then UL is associated with unordered lists, so it just means bullet points. And we use this curly brace notation because that's how we denote that the hack planner is kind of using information in this template that comes from the backend. So this is kind of a unique element in Flask that you don't see in everyday HTML. It's used for the template because we're going to basically saying, hey, fill in here whatever is given to you from the Flask route, right? So we'll have an example here, some item, right? And then it will have a link which goes to the edit path. And goes at some index. And then we'll have another link to the delete path. And it also goes for a particular index of the list, which is essentially the item ID associated with that element. And like I said earlier, we need to end our for loops in Flask. It's not like Python. You actually have to end those. Now we'll create our form. And the action will be add. Method is post. We already talked about what a post method does. It sends information to somewhere. And in this case, it's sending that information of whatever's in this form, it's sending that to the back end of our project. Here's our input field where we just have some placeholder enter item value. And then we'll also have a button there, submit. And we'll call that button add. And so we've now created our checklist template. So congratulations, everybody. We have a front end. We have a front end for our home page. But what about our edit page where the user can go to change an item? Well, we still need to do that. And I'm going to actually show that next. Right? So without going back to the slideshow, since we've already seen basically the same thing for the checklist, I'm going to build a new file called edit.html. Sorry, I renamed this accidentally. Use the same doc type tag. Let me go into the comments, by the way. We might have some questions. One question is loop.index gives the index from the for loop. That's exactly right. So that's why we're using loop index because basically it's just going to be in the order that it's displayed is how we're going to give those item IDs. Yeah, it's a really elegant solution for item IDs. You could also, you could also hard code these item IDs if you wanted to. That's totally fine, but this is just kind of an easy way of doing it. Plus, then when we delete one of our values, the item ID goes away with it. So it's a really convenient way of doing it. All right, so back to our edit.html file. Thanks for the good questions, everybody. We're going to use the HTML tags here. Again, the head tags, we're going to do that same title, Hack Planner app. Maybe we'll write edit. Tell the user that we're editing right now. And we'll put a header 1 at the top, which just says edit item instead of Hack Planner. So we're going to put another form here, but the action is actually going to be different now. Instead of sending the user to the add directory, we're going to actually send them to the edit path or directory. And so let's go ahead and specify that here. You'll remember these double curly braces basically stand in for whatever information is going to get passed into our template. So we're going to ask the user to specify an item that they are interested in editing. And then that's going to pull up whatever item is there because, again, we're passing the item ID into our render template method as an argument. Okay, and so that's why we see it here. So method equals post, we'll put. And then we have our input type, text. Give it a name, which is item. And its value, we're actually specifying the value off the bat, is equal to the item that we got from our Flask app. So we got that from the user via pushing whichever button was associated with the entry they wanted to edit. And so then we'll have a save button that we can use to submit this back to the backend and to update the entry. And so, yeah, this is just a way to have quick edit capability in our project such that we can edit any items that we feel are necessary to edit. And we'll implement this delete as well, but we don't need a separate page for that, right? Because delete will just immediately redirect back to the home page. Can't do that with edit. We need a new view. IMSNO says, has top 50 been released yet? I actually don't know. So sorry to say I don't know, but maybe someone in the chat knows about that. I know that it usually does come out around this time of year. All right, everybody. So it's kind of time for our moment of truth, actually. So I just hit this play button that opened up the terminal, and I'm actually going to type the words Flask and run in here. Uh-oh. Yeah, classic live coding error. Let's see what we have here. Luckily, I have the whole entire project coded up in a separate directory that I know works. So we're not going to spend too much time here on this, but let's see. Let's compare it. Let's see. I'm going to open up a separate window. I'll compare what I have in that window to what we have here. Okay, so someone said I got an error saying it could not locate a Flask application. This is a really common error. And when you see this error, it means that your directory is not the same as the directory where you built your project. So let's check this out. If we type pwd, it tells us which directory we're in. And in this case, we're in my desktop directory, which is where I built the project, and that's why this works. Although obviously it's not working yet. We'll see what the error is. Now, let me try running it in my other project folder. Might be an issue with the templates also. Not sure. Might be. So this is our checklist template. It says try changing the method to methods. Yeah. I know. I know. I saw that error message too, but I'm not sure where that is. All right. Well, let's type it. Let's go back to what I had originally, I guess. And as far as the loop.index thing goes, that you will always have that. So that's the answer to that. Someone else said it worked for them, so I'm glad it worked for you. I'm sorry that it's not working for me right now. I'm going to try to update these with the exact text from our slideshow. Maybe that'll work. Who knows? All right. So it must be an error in the way I wrote the methods here. Oh, I see it here. Yeah. So it must be this. Change method to methods. Yep. I guess I got confused because we were writing one single method here. And then it just, yeah. Sorry about that, everybody. Oh, and I'm using port 5000, so yeah, let's make a different port here. So this is actually good to know, that we can know how to do this. So I'll show you all what we can do is we can write down here port equals 8000 or something like that. Should work. All right, I just copy and pasted this from Stack Overflow. Should have worked. Maybe I'll just type this into the chat or into the all right, everybody. I guess I have my AirPlay on. Maybe I can get rid of that somehow. Just turn off my screen mirroring. Yeah, this is just because of my, unfortunately, because I'm using AirPlay. Talk to all of you here live, but actually, let's try it again. Okay, here it goes. Finally. All right, everybody, just in time for us to have a quick demo. I apologize for any errors with this, but AirPlay is just some feature that exists for Macs. And I guess it runs on port 5000, but all right, here's our planner. So hopefully you all can see. And let's start with come up with an idea. Add that into our planner. And then we'll say start sketching out the front end. And then we'll put in a new one that says add the let's say you wanted to add a Google Maps API. And then later you decided that you wanted to go with Bing Maps. You can just click save and edit that. Right? So when we refresh our page, it stays the same. Oh, sorry about that, everybody. There you go. Yeah, wow, I made it all the way to the end of the workshop without messing this up. But yeah, so you can delete entries, create an idea, you can add them, and you can edit them. So we have our nice little Hack Planner website going. And I'm actually going to continue with next time for the remainder of our Hack Planner with our database implementation and some API calls. That'll add some additional functionality to our Hack Planner. But for now, I hope that you all found this instructive. You learned a little bit about routes, endpoints, views, things of that nature. But happy hacking with all of you. It was excellent to hang out with you. I'm always so impressed by this community and all the knowledge that you all have. So thanks to all of our volunteers in the chat for helping out your fellow community members with any questions. But all right, take care. And someone asked for a LinkedIn, so I will definitely send that along. I try to send that when people ask for it. So here it is. But see you later, everybody.